Welcome back, and Dominic Aragon is our guest, and he has just returned from an adventure.
Yes, Long Pond, Pennsylvania, 2,000 miles away from home.
Okay, and what was the purpose of that trip?
Sure, we were covering the NASCAR Sprint Cup race weekend out there in Long Pond, Pennsylvania. So we took a shot in the dark with applying for media credentials, and they approved our team of 3. So we said we need to go out there and go cover the race weekend. So it was a lot of fun out there.
So who went with you?
Sure, we had actually 2 reporters out there, or a reporter from New Jersey and a photographer from Long Island, New York. So we had a team out there. We met up with some other journalists. There was actually 7 of us all together around our age. So really cool to see the media center take over with a lot of younger people.
Wonderful. Well, your media career started, about 8 years ago?
More or less, and actually this was my first job, getting to do the play-by-play for the football games, getting to do the camera work for some of the basketball events. So it's definitely come a long way, and Channel 10 was definitely the foundation for it.
Okay. Now, so you went there to be at this event, to capture some of the footage of that event. But what was it that drove you to apply for this permission to do this?
I've always found Pocono Raceway interesting for maybe the fans out there that don't follow NASCAR. Pocono is the only track on the schedule. It's literally a triangle, so it's 3 corners modeled after 3 separate racetracks. And I've always found the racetrack and venue interesting. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's off Interstate 80 in eastern Pennsylvania. I've been told it's like Flagstaff. It's like Grants. It's about 6,000 feet high. It's a lot of trees, a lot of forest area, and a lot of people were right about that. So that's what kind of drove me out there, and being at the racetrack, that felt like home. It definitely felt like Grants, New Mexico, out in the middle of Pennsylvania.
Okay. Now, what is your fascination with NASCAR?
Well, I think the athletic side about it. A lot of people don't realize they are athletes. These are drivers that run triathlons. They train like football players. You don't necessarily have to throw a ball or hit a baseball to be an athlete, in my opinion. And it's a national sport. These drivers have the drive any other athlete would. I think that's what's really interesting about it. And you have 43 drivers that suit up every race weekend to try and win a race. And any one of these guys can win the race because of how good they are, their equipment they're in. And it's just no other drive and motivation like any other sport.
Okay, very good. So what was the highlight for you of this event?
Sure. Well, there were about 60,000 fans in attendance. And I would say there were 3 people from New Mexico, myself, but there was a NASCAR driver from Aztec, New Mexico, and Alex Kennedy and his father at the racetrack. And getting to visit with Alex on pit road before the beginning of the race.
And the name again is Alex Kennedy?
Alex Kennedy. He's 22 years old.
Okay. Gosh, I didn't know that we had anyone from New Mexico there. So when you met with him, what was your impression of both he and his father?
Very humble people. I've known Alex a few years, and I've always bring it up to him. Alex, you represent New Mexico. You're the only driver out there. What does that mean to you? And he's very humble about it. He says it's an honor to represent New Mexico. It's an honor to represent the Southwest as a whole. So he's very humble in the way he conducts himself. He also doesn't have much sponsorship, but he takes what he can. He runs cars that are funded by his dad's company, and he's learning. He's actually running for Rookie of the Year this year in the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series. He is 3rd out of the 4 rookies. So there's still about 18, 17 races to go. Maybe Alex Kennedy will have some better runs and be a better contender for Rookie of the Year.
Sure, absolutely. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? So if that happens, you'll come back and tell us about it, won't
Absolutely.
you?
We'll have to get Alex on the show to come talk about it.
Wouldn't that be phenomenal if we could do that? Now, your fascination with cars began when you were just a little tyke.
About 4 or 5 years old. Isn't that crazy how it just kind of spirals out after that?
Right, right. So besides meeting Alex Kennedy, what was your impression of the overall event? I mean, there was the crowd, there were the cars, there were the drivers, there were the pit crews, there were all of these things. But what was it that stood out in your mind when you look at the overall event?
Well, a lot of people were asking, why would you come to Pocono? It's such a cookie-cutter racetrack. It's such an ordinary racetrack on the Sprint Cup circuit. And I would tell them, obviously, the triangle and just getting the fact to come out here. But there were a lot of accidents during the race. There were actually 2 wrecks during the race weekend where a car came off the racing surface and smashed the pit wall, and the 2 wrecks looked very identical from the replays. And so NASCAR's talking about extending the pit wall to prevent something from like that happening, because in the second wreck, Casey Kane's race car smacked one of the pit crew walls and helmets went flying. And no one thankfully was injured, but helmets went flying 25 feet and hit a building nearby. So a lot of the safety things were talked about, and there was a lot of passing in the race. So it was what's the term I'm looking for? It wasn't your typical Pocono race. It was definitely out of the norm. A lot of wrecks, a lot of cautions, plus a lot of cars running out of fuel with 2 and 3 laps to go.
Really?
Yes, and you had, I think, about 8 drivers run out of fuel from 3 laps to go to the white flag lap, and you had Matt Kenseth take the checkered flag in a fuel mileage race. Jeff Gordon finished 3rd, otherwise would have finished below the top 15. So there were a lot of out of character things at Pocono Raceway.
Okay. And so all of these circumstances that occur really impact the end result, don't they?
Sure, and what a lot of fans may not realize is NASCAR has a playoff system. So you win a race, you make the playoffs. And this could have been a wild card for any of the drivers. Kenseth had already won a race, but who knows? Because if you had Jeff Gordon win a race, he would have been locked into the championship. So there's a lot of drivers taking more risks that otherwise wouldn't, and Pocono opened up the door for that.
Okay. So you left Grants on, what, a Thursday or Friday?
Thursday morning.
Thursday morning.
Yeah.
And you flew into?
LaGuardia.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's not a very long trip from New York City into Pennsylvania.
Sure, and the track's very convenient because it's about 70 miles south of Philadelphia and about 90 miles west of New York City.
Okay, all right. And so what was your impression as you got into a new city? You went by yourself, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, I know a lot of people would be intimidated by that, and I was as well. But I was more worried, if anything, about losing the luggage on the layover.
Right.
That was the big thing.
That's always
Yeah.
a big challenge. And so, what was your impression? Now, you had to take a shuttle or a taxi?
Well, I had another friend out there staying in New York City who was covering the race weekend, so I got to stay with he and his folks. So he picked me up at LaGuardia, and he took me back to JFK on the way out. So.
Okay. So, what's your impression of the traffic?
Wow, I think we take it for granted here because, well, let me give you a great example, because from his house in Queens to the World Trade Center site's about 12 miles. We can do 12 miles here in about 10 minutes on the interstate, or even from here to Milan, it's not that far, but to take the bus and to take the shuttles and to take the subways and trains, it took us nearly 2 hours to travel 12 miles. So I think a lot of people don't realize how dense New York City is as far as population and all the buildings and all the different things you have to be watching out for.
Right. Well, years ago, I was the elder hostel coordinator for the university, and I was driving the van one day, and we came to the stop light at 2nd Street, and there were some cars coming by, and I said, now this is our rush minute.
Exactly.
I mean, we don't have a rush hour, we have a rush minute. Mm-hmm. But when we look at, let's get back to the event itself.
Sure.
What was the highlight for you? I mean, the thing that's going to stick with you forever.
Sure. Our team. We had such a great team out there. Our reporter Justin Malillo, he has a degree from Hofstra University, so he knows what he's doing. Our photographer Dante Ricky, he's going for a weatherman. He's doing the weather school out at Rutgers University, so he knew what he was doing with photography. And I felt I was well-rounded enough to help edit a lot of the articles and post a lot of our material and do a story here and there. And the fact that we had 7 of us all together that were around our age and to hit it off with the different reporters. So
okay.
That's going to stick out to me most.
Well, some of those are going to be your colleagues in the future, won't they?
We hope so, yes.
Right. Well, I have been saying for years, and Dominic, you know that I've said this, and I'll say it again. I truly believe that you developed your camera presence at a very young age, and that you're going to go on to be an ESPN commentator. I believe that because of not only the way in which you've pursued your education, your training, and your dedication to perfection. All of these things are going to impress those people at ESPN when it comes to to get a sports commentator.
Well, that means a lot, and I don't know. I wonder sometimes if that hurts myself too, because I love to have everything perfect. I'm a perfectionist, whether it comes to something with journalism or we're playing with the band or something like that. I have to have everything perfect, and I nitpick myself. I'm definitely my hardest critic.
Right, and that's good, because I see people that say, well, I'm just wonderful, and they never ever put on that critical eye and say, where do I need to improve?
Well, thank you for that. I do appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you. And we've got some footage of the event, and hopefully we can air this with this show. And I want to thank you again for joining us. And when, if Alex, it's Alex Kennedy.
Alex Kennedy.
When he is the Rookie of the Year, you need to tell him to come on, and we will do a show with him.
Excellent.
And you'll be the host, not I.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And I want to thank you for tuning in to this segment of Cibola Treasures.